Let me begin with a claim. If a thing is infinite, then it can't be a thing, because a thing is always limited. You first have to distinguish a thing in order to call it a thing. You have to be able to perceive where a thing begins and ends. But if it is infinite, then you can't distinguish it. So are we able to distinguish the universe? Well, regardless of all the attempts that we have done to capture or to calculate the boundaries of our universe, I still think there is no absolute guarantee that we can fully distinguish the entirety of this universe. Nevertheless, we consider the universe as something. But yeah, my problem is, if a thing is infinite, can it still be a thing? How do we define a thing? Does a thing have a shape? Well, if it is infinite, it can't have a shape, because there are no boundaries to enclose itself into a particular shape. Does a thing have a location in space and time? Well, if it is infinite, it can't have a specific location in space and time. It's everywhere simultaneously, and it never began, for it has always been here, and it never will end, for it will always be here. Even the word everywhere becomes meaningless when applied to infinity, because the concept everywhere is created by us within our limited lifetimes. And this word refers to something way beyond itself. The word everywhere just can't grasp what it actually is when applied to infinity. Even the word infinity becomes meaningless and contradictory compared to actual infinity, because the word infinity can only be produced and understood by a limited understanding. And of course, that's why the understanding of it contradicts itself. And of course, the production of the word contradicts itself, because the word infinity has a beginning and an end. The word came into existence when we came up with it, and it will vanish when we will stop thinking about it. So it is a limited concept referring to the unlimited, and that's kind of paradoxical. But anyway, can we define the universe, or existence rather, as a thing if it is infinite? I don't think so. Infinity doesn't have a location, it doesn't have a shape, it doesn't move because it is already everywhere, so you can't ascribe any features of motion to it. Movement is impossible for infinity, therefore it is impossible to perceive it, because we can only perceive something which can move. Infinity basically doesn't have a size, because it's infinitely big and small. Therefore, the words big and small become meaningless. There is no big and small within infinity. Infinity can never be known by anybody, because every being that has the capacity to know is always limited. So how the hell are we able to define it as something when it is impossible to grasp the totality of it? It's not even total. There is no totality because it's infinite. Like, there really is just nothing that we can ascribe to infinity itself. It has no features. Tell me, what does infinity have? Well, you might say it has infinitely everything. Yes, correct. It has an infinite amount of limited things, but what does infinity itself have? it has absolutely nothing. It has no features. Whatever feature you can come up with is automatically limited and has nothing to do with infinity itself. Only limited things can have features, and therefore infinity itself is not a thing, it's a paradox. Now, what if the universe actually has boundaries with a beginning and an end? Well, as usual, there are some logical problems as well. The first question that we asked ourselves is, if there is a boundary, then what lies behind that boundary? If it is something, then the universe isn't limited. Or we should better say, then existence isn't limited, because we would have to include this something into existence. However, if it is limited by non-existence, then how can something which doesn't exist limit something that does exist? If it doesn't exist, it isn't there, and so it can't limit something. Nothing can't limit something. So to say that existence is limited by non-existence is once again a paradox. Non-existence doesn't exist. As I have mentioned a couple of times before in other videos, non-existence is impossible. So in that sense, there can only be unlimited existence, because there is no non-existence to limit existence. Nevertheless, if you still believe that the universe or existence is limited, then think about this thing for a moment. So imagine a finite room. Imagine a finite room, and beyond this room there is literally nothing. Everything beyond this room is non-existent. So it becomes absolutely impossible to punch through the walls of this room. Not even an infinite amount of energy could destroy the walls. Well, even if you could destroy it, it would immediately reassemble itself into a room, leaving you no chance to face non-existence. If you could face non-existence, you would be dead. Now, what's so interesting about this room is that there is no outside. There is only the inside of the room. That would mean that the outside part of the room, which faces the nothingness that lies outside of this room, does not exist. You see? Imagine an object which on its left side it is facing existence, and on its right side it is facing non-existence. The right side, which faces non-existence, cannot exist because it is in contact with non-existence. So we're talking about an object here which has only one side and which can only be viewed from one side. In fact, only one side of it is able to exist. But this side would have to be infinitely thin. Because if this side would have a certain thickness, it would automatically have two sides. So the third dimension of thickness would collapse. Conclusion: the walls of this finite room that is limited by non-existence would be infinitely thin. Actually, and theoretically, it should have no thickness at all. But how can it exist then? Every object must have a certain amount of thickness in order for it to be able to manifest itself in existence. So my point is that this finite room, or the boundaries of the universe, cannot exist. The boundaries itself cannot exist because theoretically they have zero thickness. They have only one side, and every object in the universe must have two sides and a certain amount of thickness in order to exist. So this is a paradox once again. The boundaries cannot exist. And the consequences of this zero thickness problem are actually disastrous. The entire universe would actually totally implode into nothingness. Here's the explanation. So this boundary between existence and non-existence must have no thickness at all, because the side of the boundary that faces non-existence does not exist. But if the side of the boundary does not exist, how can the other side exist then? It can't. It must always have two sides in order to exist. So it doesn't matter where the boundary of existence is located. If there is a boundary between existence and non-existence, then the side which faces existence cannot exist as well. So even if the universe was as big as an electron, the inside of the universe could not exist because the outside facing non-existence does not exist. And existence must always have an inside and an outside part. So it doesn't matter where the boundary is. If there is a boundary, then the inside of the universe could not exist. Oh boy, what now? So an infinite universe is paradoxical, but a limited universe is also paradoxical. According to the logic, existence must be infinite because non-existence can't possibly manifest itself outside of existence and limit existence. Also, the boundaries cannot exist due to the zero thickness problem. But if it is infinite, then existence as a whole becomes totally meaningless and featureless because it's not even a thing anymore. And if it's not even a thing anymore, then it's nothing. Existence itself is absolutely nothing. Everything within existence is infinitely something, but existence itself as a whole is absolutely nothing. Which means that everything within existence exists, but that existence itself as a whole does not exist. Not as a finite thing, nor as an infinite thing. And that's quite a mindfuck. The logic indicates that existence must be infinite because otherwise it would implode into non-existence. But simultaneously, it indicates that infinity itself is precisely non-existence, and that's impossible. So apparently, non-existence and infinity are the exact same thing. This is a very powerful paradox. And this, to me, is the ultimate proof that logic itself is self-destructive. It always collapses and collides with itself when trying to reach for the absolute truth, which is a major sign that absolute truth will only be absolutely true when our capacity to think is destroyed, or at least the one who thinks he is in control of the thinking process. In other words, logic itself wants to kill itself. It wants to kill the very thing that is utilizing it, namely you and me. We have to die if we want to serve absolute truth. I'm not necessarily talking about physical suicide. I'm talking about the idea that you exist and that you are in control of your thinking. The idea of controlling it has to die. But of course, my stubborn ego wants to stay alive and continue to fight with this suicidal logic. Anyway, that's all, folks.